You folks know I've been watching the Anglicans for a long time. I've been rooting for the Anglican Church in North America, the ACNA, and then GAFCON is the international conservative body that has recently. They haven't split from the Episcopal Church. That's not language they would recognize. Rather, they've said they are the true church, and that Canterbury has pretty much excluded themselves from the Episcopalian International Fellowship. I don't know these terms. I just know the concepts because I'm a Methodist, and we went through something very similar in recent years. I was part of the United Methodist Church, which I believe left their heritage behind, and the Global Methodist Church had to be founded in order to reclaim that which has been lost, and that's very much a project that I'm passionate about. But another project I'm passionate about is all true believers coming together in a common, not just shared belief, but a common administrative structure. I think that's what we see in Acts of the Apostles. I very much yearn for that. I very much want to see a future Methodism that resembles where we began, started by Anglican high church clergymen, John and Charles Wesley. And I think there is no reason why we should not aim at that together. How we would get back to reunion, I have no idea. I don't think I have to know. I think I just have to care for my brothers and sisters in the Anglican fellowship. My wife and I regularly use the Book of Common Prayer. The much older language we find very life-giving, even as we are modern Christians. And so I've spoken with many Anglicans. So well, not many. A few. David Roseberry explained his church's journey out of the Episcopal Church into the ACNA. But also Joshua Nelson is a great leader in Colorado, leading the Barnabas Conference. Daniel Hixon left the Methodists entirely and went to the Anglicans. I've talked about this tradition from various angles. And then I've also spoken with people at the Institute of Religion and Democracy. That's Mark Tooley's group. Ryan Danker works there, and another gentleman that works there is Jeff Walton, who I'm going to be speaking with today. He's their Anglican director. He's recently gotten back from bicycling across Spain. He graciously said yes to talk to me today because he is, for all intents and purposes, an Anglican expert. He's been on the inside of affairs of the ACNA and can speak to what's going on there. And so today I'm going to talk to him about 4 bishops that I'm concerned about there, and that it's not just me. I don't know anything. It's just from the outside looking in. What are we going to do about this crisis in righteousness, as I would call it? But it's not like the Episcopal Church is doing any better. Dame Mullally just recently got put in as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so far as I can tell, she is a worldly neo-Marxist plant. I don't see anything compellingly Christian in her, and maybe I'm missing something. Anyway, this is a long setup just for Mr. Walton now to correct all of my missed impressions here. This is Jeff Walton here, and he is joining me from, are you in Arlington or DC? Where are you?
I'm in downtown DC at the IRD offices. We're about 3 blocks north of the White House. So I apologize if there's any loud noises in the background. There appears to be some fighter planes flying over in the last hour. So we never know what excitement is going to be going on down the street.
Yeah, well, if we get some fighter jets and maybe it'll spice things up a little bit. But I appreciate you joining me from the IRD office, and yeah, let's talk about who you are before we get into the Anglicans broadly. Did you grow up Anglican, or where'd you come from? What's your expertise?
Yeah, I grew up in the Episcopal Church, which I was confirmed in, and had sort of an ecumenical childhood. Growing up on the street that I lived on in suburban Seattle, everyone went to church, and everyone went to a different church. So I went to Vacation Bible School at my next door neighbor's Lutheran church. I would go to Lenten Wednesday night suppers at my Roman Catholic neighbors. My parents went to a Bible study that was hosted by Baptist neighbors. And then my godparents were Presbyterians. So I covered pretty much all the ground you could cover that was within walking distance of my house. And that shaped a lot of my interests as a kid. I really was curious about what different churches were, what made them distinct. And I had sort of a broadly evangelical childhood, and then really reconnected with the Episcopal Church, probably at late elementary school. And that sort of put me on a trajectory to really having some of the things that you all have heard about, liturgy, hymnody, different forms of structure that sort of informed my faith. And that communicated to me this idea that while my faith is always personal, it is not strictly individual. I'm being carried along in a river of sorts by a communion of saints. And that has led me into sort of liturgical historic forms of Christianity. Although I have friends of many, many different Christian backgrounds that have really been very informative to me and helpful in their own Christian walk. So I just say that to say that I'm in a parish that was part of the Episcopal Church and has been a part of the Anglican Church in North America since its inception. And that is where I find myself today. The ACNA is a small religious body of about 130,000 people. A good chunk of its churches either came out of the Episcopal Church or were planted by those who came out of the Episcopal Church. And at the same time, most of the people who are new, who are coming through the doors of our churches, are not current or former Episcopalians. There are some, but most are people who are coming from either non-Christian backgrounds, or if they are believers, they are coming from backgrounds that are less liturgical and are maybe considering some of the resources that Anglicanism has provided us with, like, as you mentioned, the Book of Common Prayer. So that's sort of where I'm at. My parish is in suburban Washington, D.C. It's the Falls Church Anglican. And I've worked at IRD for about 19 years now, writing primarily on the Global Anglican Communion, which is a grouping of over 40 churches that are descended from the missionary activities of the Church of England. The Episcopal Church would be one of those. The ACNA is another church that is part of that sort of broad tradition. And then there are a number of churches around the world, like the Church of Nigeria, Uganda, Southeast Asia, several others that are quite dynamic and are representative of what we would call global South Christianity, which Anglicans like me are increasingly looking towards, not only for vibrancy, but for a faithful communication of the gospel message.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't even have on our agenda to talk much about global Anglicanism, but we might pivot to go that direction because it does look like the center of Anglicanism is shifting greatly, depending on how you look at that. So you grew up on the West Coast, now you're on the East Coast. You've been surrounded by various traditions. You've chosen the Anglican tradition, which is great because you got an expert right there next to you, Ryan Danker at the IRD. And then you guys together are just speaking truth as you see it. I was reading your article just a minute ago on, let's see, it would have been Bishop Derek Jones. There are several crises within the ACNA. You describe it as a small denomination. Yes, the Global Methodist Church currently kind of dwarfs the ACNA. I'd like to think the ACNA has not just staying power, but growth potential. But it looks like things, I don't know. What do you think? Does the ACNA have growth potential in this current historical moment, or do you think that it's a tradition on the wane?
I think ACNA has been able to show consistent, modest growth. Um, it is not as large as I would like it to be, but it is one of the denominations. Others would include the GMC, the Presbyterian Church in America, um, probably also the Assemblies of God, that has shown some consistent growth. So I think that that's a positive thing. One
Mhm.
of the questions is, are we reaching people with the gospel message who would otherwise not be reached? Are we part of a mosaic of different ministries that we're one puzzle piece that God is using to reach a broader number of people? Or are is our growth reflective of consolidation, of faithful Protestants who are looking for a place to stand and are congregating with us? And the answer is probably a little bit of both.
Mm.
At my own parish, I meet people who are regularly from mainline Protestant churches who usually there's been some sort of change, like their senior pastor has departed, and who's maybe a longtime trusted spiritual leader. And after that point, they're looking around to see what the options are. And they might be coming to my parish or checking out some other parishes because they feel that we're centered on the gospel message, or there are aspects of our worship that they feel they can connect with well. And at the same time, I'm also meeting people who are completely new Christians.
Hmm.
The building that my church constructed in 2019 is in an extremely diverse neighborhood in Falls Church, Virginia, with a lot of people from across the world. So I have met in the pews people from Cameroon, Afghanistan, India, a variety of different countries. And I'm friends with people from Malaysia, Singapore, a variety of Nigeria. So we are getting a surprisingly diverse community is finding us, even though diversity for its own sake is not a specific articulated goal of my parish. So sometimes
Interesting
God.
thing there. Wesley Biblical Seminary is one of the official seminaries of the Global Methodist Church, and they've been putting out metrics showing their own diversity of their student body, which is not a goal of theirs at all. They kind of steer clear of that identity politics, and yet they're much more diverse than any of the United Methodist official seminaries that talk about it so much. It's almost like there's an inverse relationship between how much you talk about the issue and then how much you actually solve the issue. So it's just fun to see that commonality in two different places. Yours being a local church, but even so, get back on that train you were riding. What were you
Oh,
saying?
just to say that there is evidence that we are reaching people who otherwise might not be reached.
Mm,
And at the same time, there is also some growth that's taking place as a process of consolidation. People coming from mainline Protestant churches in our area, who are not necessarily from an Anglican or Episcopal background, but are receptive to aspects of it. I have good friends at my own church who come from the United Methodist Church, the PCUSA, and other mainline Protestant expressions. And in some cases, they still identify as being within those traditions, but they're looking for a good local congregation, and they feel that my parish happens to be a place where they can be well received and ministered to, and where their own gifts and talents can be well used. I would just say that there's no clear-cut answer in where the
mhm,
broader ACNA's growth is coming from, except to say that there are multiple sources of new congregants, and those have resulted in steady, gradual growth, which is not hit it out of the ballpark big, but is
mhm,
not shrinking. Additionally, one of the positive things that I would say about ACNA, and we'll be able to get to some of the real struggles we have as well in this conversation, but
mhm,
one of the positive things is that ACNA, which was only started in 2009, now has churches in 49 US states and 10 Canadian provinces. So
mhm,
that's pretty substantial as far as our spread. And of course, we've had a heavy emphasis on church planting, which has been beneficial to us. However, there's a real challenge in that as well. If you look at the church planting map that is viewable on the ACNA's website, which, by the way, anglicanchurch.net is where you can locate that map. It shows that many of our new congregations are located either in major metropolitan areas or college towns. And that makes a lot of sense because college students are of the age where they are evaluating their beliefs and they're open to new things. And of course, most people live in proximity of a major metropolitan area. But this is one of the things actually that is perhaps complementary and distinct from the Global Methodist Church, where Global Methodism is heavily represented in rural communities or in areas that are not necessarily in a major metropolitan area. The Washington, D.C. area, for example, especially Northern Virginia, has a significant number of ACNA parishes. However, we unfortunately only have two GMC churches within the metro area. So this is something that might be actually positive in relationship between the two churches, is that they complement each other in their geographic reach. And that is something that we've talked about here at IRD, and we're very hopeful about, is being able to form connections that are positive between the GMC and the UMC that will draw on some of the strengths of each church. Additionally, there's other contact points as well, obviously Asbury Seminary, and a number of other institutions that have good connections and serve both church communities.
Yeah, Mr. Tooley's done a good job highlighting the dearth of GMC presence in Washington, D.C., and that's what we last spoke about. And hopefully there's going to continue to be movement there because there's high capacity there, or at least I'd like to think. And looking at the Anglican tradition, I remember just being overwhelmed in seminary whenever I looked at a global map of Anglican growth and saw that it's in regions where there are not people of English descent. That it doesn't seem to be a tradition that flourishes really at all in proximity to an ethnic background or cultural background. It seems to be something that is able to transcend cultural barriers, despite what one might infer from the name. So, in this present historic moment, there's been a large influx of young men into some Christian traditions. I've wondered, that really hasn't benefited Methodism at all, and I think it's because we're largely associated in the public mind with a low church ethos. But you're seeing a lot of men flow into Eastern Orthodox, traditional Roman Catholic, and hardline Calvinist churches, and I've wondered if the Anglican tradition in some of these. Would I be right in thinking that the Reformed Episcopal Church is a subgrouping under the ACNA, or are they something different entirely?
Yeah, the Reformed Episcopal Church is a sub-jurisdiction of ACNA. It is one of our
Sub-jurisdiction.
original founding bodies. There were about six groups that came together to
Mhm.
initially form what became ACNA. And the Reformed Episcopal Church, which separated from the Episcopal Church in, I believe, the 1870s, they were one of the bodies that helped found ACNA. So if you see a Reformed Episcopal parish, that is an outpost of ACNA and one of the founding parts of ACNA, although it's existed separate from the Episcopal Church for a much longer period of time than some of the rest of us were.
See, and this is what's so confusing about trying to understand Anglicanism is there are so many bodies that
Mhm.
relate or don't relate to one another or overlap. I know that one of the issues has been that there are overlapping jurisdictions where sometimes they'll be planting churches and they don't even know about each other. And so it's a more porous body than the Methodists are used to, where you're just in or you're out, and it's all under one body. And then you'll also have confusing situations like the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't acknowledge the ACNA, but is in relationship or was in relationship with GAFCON leadership, and GAFCON acknowledged ACNA, whereas Canterbury didn't. I think that I understand this. So there are these different bodies that do and don't acknowledge one another,
Mhm.
and it's hard for outsiders to know where anybody stands, really.
Mhm.
And you're probably not the only body like that, but I've kind of wondered if in the public mind, there's enough awareness of high liturgical Anglican tradition that American young men are drawn to, if they've seen that influx at all, or if they're like the Methodists, where they're largely not considered in this current moment. Do you see any indications either
Mhm.
way?
Yeah, Anglicanism, just to give a brief overview, is a really broad umbrella. Um, Early in its formation, or at least early in its separation from Roman Catholicism, of which the Church of England was a geographic arm of for many hundreds of years,
Mhm.
um, there was a key point of difference between people who were more of a Catholic expression and that they emphasized sacramental ministry, and those who were more Protestant or Puritan, in that they emphasized the proclamation of God's word. And these weren't necessarily exclusive groups, but think of them as different tent poles within the same family. And during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, she ushered through what was called the Elizabethan Compromise. And this was basically that, um, unlike some of the confessional churches that existed on the continent during the Protestant Reformation, that the Anglicans would be bound together by what they prayed. So the phrase is, "What we pray is what we believe." And that meant that some people would have a different internal understanding of those prayers, but they would be going through the same liturgy and speaking the same prayers.
Mm,
Uh, because of that, that provided sort of a runway for a very broad umbrella.
mm.
So you would see people who would be considered fairly low church Protestant, and then you would also see people who were much more high church, and eventually in the 19th century, what became known as Anglo-Catholicism. And those are all under the same umbrella. So you'll see different Anglican expressions around the world. The Anglican Communion is a loose structure that has existed since about the 1860s. And it is a body of not a single hierarchical church like Roman Catholicism. Rather, it is a series of generally self-governing, mostly autonomous churches around the world that are in relationship with one another. Now,
Well,
in
this is what
terms
I
of,
understood to be getting interrupted, though, is because I know that, okay, the Roman Catholic doctrine of papal supremacy, I don't know, the supremacy of the Pope, utilized this
Mhm.
phrase, first among equals. That same exact phrase has been applied to the Archbishop of Canterbury, right? So I always assumed that this was kind of just an approximation of Roman Catholic papal authority put in the office of the Archbishop of Canterbury. But you would say no, it's really more independent and co-equal than that.
Yeah, the analogy that's often used is the US Supreme Court. It has 9 different justices. One of them is the Chief Justice. That person is the first among equals. That justice has one vote, just as the other justices do. But the Chief Justice sends invitations to meetings, sets the agenda of the meetings, and then oversees them, even though has the same voting power of the other associate justices.
Hmm.
In that regard, that analogy might work for Anglicanism. Each church has each national church, which we would refer to as a province in Anglican parlance, is its own governance, and it has its own top leader or metropolitan. The term we use is primate, as that just means first bishop. Some of those primates are called archbishops. Some are called bishop moderators. Others are called presiding bishops. It depends upon the national church.
Mm.
So what would happen is within the Anglican Communion, uh, over time, since the 1860s, you've had the Archbishop of Canterbury sort of viewed as a central historic figure who everyone is in common connection with. And then there are other ways of relating within that, and those structures developed through the 1970s. So what you have are these different churches, which are functionally self-governing, but are in relationship with one another. And they're usually in connection with the Archbishop of Canterbury in some way, shape, or form.
Mm.
Um, that is what in the current moment is perceived to be shifting.
Yeah.
And there is disagreement on this. So what I'm going to do is give you, you mentioned the Global Anglican Future Conference, or GAFCON, which
Hmm.
my church, the Anglican Church in North America, is a part of. And I'll give you that perspective and then explain how that's distinct from other perspectives within the Anglican Communion. Because
Okay.
I'm giving you Jeff Walton's viewpoint, which is one of many. There are also close to 90 million Anglicans in the world. It's considered the third largest Christian religious body, behind Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy.
Mm.
Most of that is located in the global south. However, this is a church family that is pretty old. and it has some common points of connection, including the Book of Common Prayer, certain concepts like the Articles of Religion, and then what we call the formularies. So these are uh, areas of common historic connection,
Hmm.
but you don't have a single papal figure who is at the top who can command something of another member province. So, for example, while the Archbishop of Canterbury, as I've mentioned, can host meetings, send invitations, and then set an agenda for that meeting, uh, they do not interfere directly in other provinces. Sometimes, to my own chagrin, um, a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, had been repeatedly asked to discipline the US-based Episcopal Church when it went off the rails. And basically, his message was, well, there's not really much we can do here.
Hmm.
Those who were connected to GAFCON, like me, disagreed with that. But that is what he and those advising him in Canterbury established. So as a result, that's what we're largely dealing with. Um, so
When you
we
say
have
that's what we're
these.
largely dealing with, you're saying they established a precedent where different regions around the world can't really interfere with one another. Therefore, that
Yeah,
led to
they can.
precedent for GAFCON doing what it's doing now.
Yeah, there's basically two things that other provinces can do. They can say, one, who can represent them. So,
Hmm.
for example, if there's an ecumenical conversation between the Anglican Communion and the Roman Catholic Church, they can say someone from the Episcopal Church can't represent us in that role or capacity.
Hmm.
And that was sort of that restriction was put in place as sort of a slap on the wrist over a decade ago. The other thing that they can do is they can say who they are in relationship with and who they are not.
Yeah,
So
this is
many.
like the ancient church and the patriarchates and the Eastern Orthodoxy. We're seeing the Great Schism sort of right now, where once upon a time the Pope was considered one of the patriarchs, and then he excommunicated the East, and they executed communicated him, and they never came back together. So now it does feel pretty similar. Like that's what's happening right now with GAFCON and Canterbury. Although Canterbury hasn't issued any formal separation from GAFCON, have they?
No, they haven't. And
Okay.
that's something that's it's a pretty distinct thing to say. That uh, nobody has said that they are leaving the Anglican Communion.
Sure.
What has happened instead is GAFCON's leadership has asserted that they are seeking to lead the Anglican Communion
Hmm.
and to express how it sort of internally understands itself to be. So you might have seen some headlines across the last couple weeks basically saying, oh, the Anglican Communion is splitting, or the word schism.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's an accurate term. And the
Hmm.
reason why is, again, we're dealing with over 40 functionally autonomous churches that are in relationship with one another. Nobody's really going anywhere. The question is, who are they looking to as sort of the central hub of connection and meeting?
Hmm.
And GAFCON has, its leaders have taken in this particular moment the opportunity to say the Archbishop of Canterbury is that see is currently vacant, which it's true.
Hmm.
Dame Sarah Malali has been elected, but I shouldn't say elected, appointed.
Hmm.
But what will happen is that there is not someone in that position until March. So as a result of that, GAFCON has chosen to step into that leadership vacuum and say that they are seeking to reorganize as they understand it. Again, no one's going anywhere. The thing is, who do these different provinces look to and how do they
Hmm.
organize themselves? And I think that that's a key distinction. This is not a schism or a split in the way that maybe other people might have understood it to be.
Hmm.
It is a grouping of people that have been in relationship with each other, and many of them are going to continue to be in relationship with one another, but they're going to have sort of central tent poles or central hubs that they are sort of in orbit of. Now, one thing I did want to add in As I mentioned, I'm part of the Anglican Church in North America, which was
Hmm.
formed in 2009. The ACNA is not formally recognized as part of the worldwide Anglican Communion by its four recognized structures, which are called the Instruments of Communion. These four
Hmm.
structures are the Archbishop of Canterbury's office, the primates meeting, which is a meeting of all the different top bishops of the member churches, the Anglican Consultative Council, which is a body of bishops, clergy, and laity that are elected by each province. And then finally, the Lambeth Conference, which is organized and facilitated by the Archbishop of Canterbury roughly once every 10 years. None of those four structures uh, existed prior to the 1860s, and most have only existed since the 1970s.
Hmm.
However, none of those structures recognize ACNA as a member province of the Anglican Communion. They would perhaps use a friendly term to say we're an ecumenical partner. And they will
Hmm.
recognize ACNA clergy as clergy within the Anglican tradition, but they don't recognize ACNA. So the question is then who does recognize ACNA? Well, there are two other groupings of Anglican Communion provinces. One is GAFCON, which we mentioned,
Hmm.
which was
Hmm.
called together in 2008 and ultimately was the grouping of worldwide Anglican provinces that initiated ACNA coming into being. And then the other is what's called the Global South Fellowship of Anglicans, which is a larger grouping of Global South provinces. And it also recognizes ACNA among its cohort with both voice and vote. So those are
So
two
messy.
large, yeah, those are two large international Anglican bodies that recognize ACNA as authentically Anglican,
Hmm.
whereas the instruments of communion of the Anglican communion, which would be the Canterbury-based structures, those would regard ACNA as an ecumenical partner, but not as a member church. So that's the distinction that
One
I would.
thing, one thing I want to belabor with you because it impacts how things move forward in America. Uh, I did read the statement from GAFCON severing from or delegitimating the Canterbury leadership. And it seems to me that they are you
Hmm.
just portrayed a situation in which different bodies, not patriarchates, but provinces, are going to have different affiliations. But it seemed to
Hmm.
me that there was language in place in the GAFCON statement that if you are in relationship with us, you will not be in relationship with them, and so forcibly excluding Canterbury from whatever fellowship that they're in. It seems to me that if there is a uh, I don't remember how explicit the language is, but if there's a province that tries to maintain relationships with both bodies, that GAFCON's going to say no, then we're not going to be in relationship with you. Did I imagine that being in place? Okay.
No, that there is a so there's a recent GAFCON statement that the
Mhm.
GAFCON primates affirmed and was released by Archbishop Lawrence Mbanda, who is the chair of GAFCON. He's the Archbishop
Mhm.
of Rwanda, and that there are a series of asks in that letter. The fifth one is the one that says we're not looking to Canterbury as our central hub of connection. And this means that if you are a province that's in connection with us, you shouldn't respond to invitations from
Mhm.
Canterbury. You
Mhm.
shouldn't send money to Canterbury. And this is probably the bigger one, the third one, which is you should not take money from structures that come through Canterbury. So that is a pretty bold ask, to be candid. And it is also what gives this statement teeth. Um, I have been favorably predisposed to this statement because I
Mhm.
believe such an ask is a necessary prerequisite for reordering the communion. However, it in of itself, while necessary, is not in itself sufficient. Um, we need bold leaders to make a bold ask and to step
Mhm.
forward. That's now happened, and GAFCON has done that. The second step, which is what will give this gravitas, is how many people choose to follow that leadership. I've said before that there are a number of provinces that we would regard as theologically conservative, but are not necessarily part of the GAFCON movement. They might be
Mhm.
part of the broader global South. And these folks tend to be institutional conservatives, people who are theologically orthodox, but they don't want to rock the boat, and their historic relationships with Canterbury are important to them.
Mhm.
Those are the people who will really determine if this is a key moment that launches us forward into a newly sort of reordered Anglican communion, or if it's just going to be a bold declaration for a handful that nobody else is really going to be swayed by. And time will tell if that is true or not. I
I don't
think what
think
we're
I had
going to see
appreciated this before
is,
talking to you. That's interesting. Yeah, I assumed that GAFCON was ascendant, that the momentum was with them, and that the global Anglicans that want to continue into the future see progressivism for the cancer that it is, and will have the good sense to cut off Canterbury. But it doesn't seem like quite that done of a deal to you as you look at things. That it could go either way, huh?
I think it could. I am obviously positively predisposed to GAFCON because I've had good experiences with GAFCON leadership. And GAFCON's leadership also called to create the Anglican Church in North America, which then came into being the following year. It also created or called into being the Anglican Church in Brazil, which has been one of the big success stories of GAFCON, and a number of other what we call extra provincial dioceses. These are
Mhm.
groupings of Anglicans that are coming together in places where maybe the structures that are officially in place and recognized by Canterbury are compromised, not theologically
Mhm.
orthodox, and they are seeking to put together alternative structures. This would include the Diocese of the Southern Cross in Australia, those areas of Australia that are outside of the Diocese of Sydney, which is very conservative,
Mhm.
or the Anglican Church, the Confessing Church of Australia and New Zealand. Uh, and these are other structures that are coming into place. And that's been GAFCON's real strength, has been to provide an international kind of stamp of recognition on conservative Anglicans that are doing ministry in places outside of Canterbury structures. So that is, I hope I'm not getting into the weeds here, but simply to
Well,
say that it's something that's been helpful.
yeah, I want to the segue I appreciate you setting up was you were talking about how bold leadership is needed now in order to fix what has been mangled. And especially in the American context, if Anglicanism is going to continue to be a tradition that has gifts to offer the American people, then it seems to me that such leadership is needed. When Martin Luther led his Reformation near the end of his life, he had to concede that people who had followed him into the Lutheran tradition had not actually achieved biblical holiness any more than the Roman Catholic tradition had. That it really had been quite ineffective at building Christ-like character, as ineffective as the Roman Catholic tradition. And so this is something that the Methodist tradition in its beginning was uniquely concerned with is authentic discipleship, building the mind of Christ in its people, and was once upon a time known for actually inculcating the habitus of Christ into its own people. And then, of course, we fell into mainline milk toast, lukewarm stuff. What's needed to see in this present moment, both the Global Methodist Church and the ACNA were responses to the decline and depravity of the liberal tradition that took over these traditions. And we said, no, we're not going to be a part of that. We're leaving that behind. And then what is needed right now is to see the ways in which a more orthodox Christian theology practically results in saints being made more than the liberal tradition. So it really undoes our shared witness. And the Global Methodist Church is only a couple years old. It would be foolhardy to imagine we're going to keep our hands clean, although I hope we do, and I want to be a part of that. But just looking at the ACNA, you guys are only a couple decades old. And right now, you have crises with 4 bishops that I count, and this is as an outsider. I'm just going to briefly summarize what I know. Bishop Warner got active at Incarnation Church, bullied and strong armed the people who were there, and it seems to be based on female clergy. But there's also bad behavior that was promoted for a long time among its clergy, preying upon local people. I still haven't gotten to the bottom of that. Derek Jones was inhibited publicly whenever he refused to be rebuked by ACNA leadership. He was the head of the chaplaincy ministry. He's now trying to take that whole ministry away from the ACNA. It looks like that's going to court. Bishop Ruck has been on trial. He was the previous head of the ACNA. He apparently mishandled one of his buddies that was molesting people at a church camp. I don't remember the particulars of that, but his trial has been mishandled so badly that different prosecutors, like two sets of prosecutors, have quit. This is all from the outside layman's not familiar. And then Bishop Wood is the current Archbishop of the ACNA and has recently had allegations made against him of very inappropriate interactions with a woman, a children's minister under his care, and then also misspending church funds for a pickup truck that he used for camping stuff. I mean, all of these guys, I'm glad that they're not getting caught, going out and hiring prostitutes and snorting cocaine. And I mean, it does get worse, but it's still pretty bad. It is rank unholiness, indifference to the high calling of Christ. They have not stayed above reproach. I was very skeptical of the accusations against Wood until I just read a lot more into it. It just seems like it'd be very difficult to fabricate this stuff, and why it would be. I guess hypothetically it still could, and I know that you guys are friends, and I'm sure he's a fantastic guy personally. But I mean, this is the same issue with the tradition I came from. We got wonderful people that'd be great to sit and have a beer with, I'm sure, but a holy disciple of Christ, they are not. And sticking feathers up your butt does not make you a chicken. And that's kind of the Anglican caricature that we have is, oh, these guys are all about their liturgy, they got their nice robes, and then they go home and they're the hypocrites that everybody else is. And I think it's a tragic thing, and maybe it's all fake, and I want to give a platform to people saying, look, this is all the work of Satan. It's not real. I know these guys are all righteous. If that's the thing to say, then let's say it. But if what we're seeing is that the ACNA has not been up to the task of protecting the tradition that's been entrusted to them, then we need to have a conversation about how it is that the Methodists can learn from you guys, and then how it is that you might imagine that the Anglican tradition needs to be reorganized. I don't know what direction to go from here, but as you hear me regurgitate all that information as poorly as I did, what correction and finesse do you think is needed to lead us to a wise and better resting place? And take as long as you want on that. I took it for a long time, so steer it wherever you want it.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Well, I think the big takeaway that is important for all of us to know is that we are all sinners, and all of us bring our sin with us to the foot of the cross. Do not think that across any Christian tradition that the grass is greener on the other side, because I can tell you that every vibrant Christian tradition is full of sinners. So understand that the church is a hospital, and there will be sin, there will be hypocrisy, and there will be, to put it mildly, missing the mark or falling short probably isn't sufficient. There will be idolatries. So the people will look for things to save them that cannot save them. And I am no exception to that. So that's an important place to start. One of the things that I appreciate about Anglicanism, it does not claim to be the one true church. It understands, due to some of its historic origins, that it is a product of very fallible, broken people. But God can use broken pieces and can form them into something that he can use. And hopefully we will be willing agents in his providence. So that is where I would start with Anglicanism. The aspects of our current crises are pretty evidence of that. They are evidence of that. What I would say is that there are four different current problem areas with Episcopal authority, lowercase e Episcopal bishop's authority, that are of varying severity and consequence. I would say that the first two that you mentioned, involving Bishop Chris Warner, who, disclosure, is my own diocesan bishop,
Mm,
and Bishop Derek Jones, who heads the jurisdiction of Armed Forces and Chaplaincy. That's the federal endorsing body that has endorsed ACNA chaplains for service in the U.S. military and beyond. Both of those are probably in the wind down process right now. Starting with Incarnation Church in Williamsburg, there was a basically there are competing narratives on what has taken place in that parish, and a lot of this can be seen online. Um, I have found that it is very complicated, and I know that's not what listeners want to hear. They would like a this is what happened.
mhm,
What I will say is that I visited Incarnation myself in the month of August, and or maybe it was late July, excuse me. And I found that the congregation is intact. It is reasonably healthy. People were very warm, and that some of the online narrative that had been promoted by some people that the congregation has collapsed was completely untrue.
mm,
That does not mean that the argumentation that they had of their concerns with Bishop Warner is untrue. It simply means that the congregation was there, was continuing to function and do good ministry, and visiting in a relatively low attendance summer month, I found it to be pretty vibrant. Um, so, in that regard, that is simply a cautionary note that what we read online may be part of the story, but is not the entirety of the story. And also that there are people sometimes who take a narrative and then they interpret it through that narrative lens. I'll try to do a brief recap for those who are viewing. There is basically a dispute in ACNA right now over holy orders. This is the issue of who is capable of serving in the role of a deacon, a priest, or a bishop. Um, Unlike in the Global Methodist Church, which is functionally egalitarian, in the ACNA, there are a variety of different structures, some of which would be more egalitarian and some of which would be more complementarian. My diocese is regarded as being more egalitarian. We have women who serve as deacons, as priests, and yes, even as rectors, which are the senior pastors of congregations. That puts us in a minority place within ACNA. Most ACNA dioceses do not ordain women to the priesthood, and no bishop can be elected who is a woman within ACNA. And that is because we understand that a bishop is for the entire church,
mhm,
and we don't want to compromise the convictions and conscience of people who believe it's ontologically impossible for a woman to be a bishop, or for that matter, a priest. Um, so there is a people who are very concerned about this. They consider this an issue of primary disagreement.
mhm,
I got to put my cards on the table. I think this is a secondary issue. Many of my good friends profoundly disagree with me on this. They believe this is a first order issue, and they believe that if a woman is serving as a priest, that she is not actually a priest, but she is live action role playing one, and therefore she is providing sacraments which are invalid, or they are not actually sacraments.
mhm,
Those are folks who mostly come from a high church perspective. However, there are also people who come from a low church perspective who would point to the words of Paul in his letter to Timothy, saying that a woman's place is to be silent in the church, and therefore they believe that a woman should not be in a role of leadership of a church body. Now, there's a lot of area here that's gray. Almost every Anglican parish in the United States is going to have women who serve on its vestry, which is its elder board. So this is not a situation like some of the conservative Presbyterian expressions, for example, that don't have women serving in the role of ruling elder or teaching elder. There are always going to be some women around in some capacity of lay leadership within the ACNA. I also try to emphasize as well that those who oppose women in these roles are, for the most part, doing so based on an appeal to history and tradition, and they correctly see that women in the role of priest is a 20th century innovation. I think it's hard to argue with that. I think it is an innovation. Um, However, those who are more egalitarian are going to point to places in which women were not silent. Either deacons who were women, such as Phoebe and Susanna, who are named in Scripture. Yes, I understand that some will say those are deaconesses, not deacons, and they would consider those to be separate orders. But if we're going to the Greek, the word used is deacon. And then the other aspect as well of that is that there are women in positions of leadership, prophetesses like Anna, certainly judges like Deborah, who her entire function was to rule over men. Yes, an argument is made that she was stepping into a role that should have been fulfilled by Barak, but she was willing to be used by God in that function, and he used her to do that in his sovereignty. So the point is, circling back, there's strong disagreement of people who believe that this is a first order issue and people who believe it is a secondary issue. And my own diocese, which has a mix of people who are faithful Christian believers who are convicted on this in different ways, is one setting in which this has played out. Those who view everything in an overly reductionist context, which there are some online, will pin everything to this issue. They see the advent of women in holy orders as a compromise with culture, chiefly rooted in the 1960s, and that compromise has been to the detriment of the church, to put it mildly. Um, so I have friends in my diocese who are laity and clergy who have very different views on this. However, I've spoken with my diocesan bishop on this matter, and he also understands that there are different people who have different convictions in my diocese about this. This is not a settled issue as it is in some other denominations that came out of the Protestant mainline.
Mm-hmm.
However, he believes that it's his role as bishop to ensure the comity of the diocese, which is that those who are of different convictions will still play well with one another. So the concern was within the church in Williamsburg, which, by the way, is the only Anglican church within about maybe not quite an hour's drive, pretty close to it. That's brought together some people of some pretty different convictions. And what they have found was that some of the church's elected leadership did not want to have a rector come in who was okay with women in clergy roles. Now, just to say right up front, no one was ever considering bringing in a female clergywoman to lead that was never seriously
Interesting.
discussed.
Okay.
The issue was what did a man who would be brought in to lead the parish, what would they believe?
Yeah.
And Bishop Warner has articulated to the diocese that the requirement he had is that anyone who brought in to serve as a rector would be willing, regardless of how they felt about women in holy orders, would be willing to play well with others. And that's my term, by the way, play well. He didn't say
Mm-hmm.
that term.
Yeah.
But the point was ensure the comity of the diocese and not have someone brought in who would be throwing bombs at, other rectors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, That may be overly idealistic on his part. I don't know if that's possible in our current landscape, but um, I am very favorably predisposed to my diocesan bishop. I trust him. And a lot of people listening to this podcast who are Anglican will not agree with me on that. They have different experiences and different relationships. And in some cases, they really trust and favor their diocesan bishop, who may be in a different position than mine. This is sort of my one of my friends jokes that my motto is nuance forever, and that may be uh, correct in this instance. But what has happened is a grouping of people who do not believe that women should be in holy orders left Incarnation Church. They've started a church plant in a neighboring town, and that appears to have in the short term solve the problem. Um, the what I've found is that in most communities where there are multiple Anglican churches, if there is a convictional difference on something that is perceived as a first order issue, parishioners will self-segregate.
Hmm.
They will gravitate towards the parish that its leadership mostly reflects their viewpoint on a core issue. And women in leadership would be one example. Um, I've said that of the towns in Virginia that have Anglican churches, what happened in Williamsburg as a congregational dispute would not have happened in Richmond. It would not have happened in Charlottesville. And the reason why is there are multiple Anglican churches serving those communities that have different leadership, different styles, and different convictions. That is something that I think has resolved itself in the Williamsburg case. There's been a pulling apart. There's been a new church community that's been started that I hope will thrive and will reach a different group of people. And that position is probably okay for the moment from my perspective. Some of the people who came out of that are carrying some really difficult burdens and they feel
Hmm.
very hurt. Some of them feel that they were treated very poorly by the bishop.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, the bishop feels that he really went out of his way to go down to Williamsburg as often as he could, to speak with people, to pull together meetings, and that some of the lay leaders of the congregation would not come and participate in those meetings. So, talking to both of them, I can really see hurt and difficulty. And some of you who are listening might be like, well, why does this matter? This is just one parish.
Hmm.
It speaks to Anglicanism's strengths and weaknesses. We have a diffuse authority structure where we have elected lay leaders. We have a rector who is the senior pastor of a congregation, and then we have a bishop who they are accountable to. Each has a sphere of authority and that they are seeking to steward faithfully. And sometimes when things are working, those things just really fire really well, like an engine should. And sometimes they have real difficulties with one another, and you can have real intractable differences with a bishop or with lay leadership of a church. And that is why I see this as one vignette of a broader challenge that Anglicans face. And my hope is that that has, in this case, has been resolved effectively. And I hear generally good good communications from those I'm in contact with on both sides. Although, as I've said, they carry some pretty substantial burdens. But my hope is that space and time will resolve those issues. And also having a gracious heart towards one another, which is like when a group feels it has to separate over
Hmm.
core convictions, you want the other to thrive in their
Hmm.
ministry. And I hope that that's what will happen in this case.
Yeah, church only
Moving on
works
to,
if we're gracious. And
yeah.
I appreciate you belaboring the issues that, I mean, surely the Global Methodist Church is going to deal with women in ministry, even if it's been largely resolved in America. We're going to be a global body, and non American bodies are not going to navigate these issues the same. And we do need to be thinking about how it is that we're going to graciously navigate these things, even as there are people who say, "Hey, your women pastors are LARPing." Like that's hard to get past, and there's a reason why this trips people up. Um, we know we're dealing with a Methodist audience, and they can only track this stuff for about an hour. And we have three other bishops that I've already rehearsed some of the allegations on. Is there a resource that you would point people toward to learn more about the nuance in these issues that might help them more graciously receive kind of the broad picture that I've painted?
Yeah, so there's three things that I'd like to commend to readers. One is my own website, Juicy Ecumenism, which is the blog of the Institute on Religion and Democracy. You can find that at juicyecumenism.com. And we have a lot of different writings as a staff there, both from us and from guest writers. The other that I would recommend is I have found that Arlie Coles at The Living Church, which is a publication that I write for, does an excellent job navigating through not only news, but processes, which is how are churches canonically organized. I would strongly commend following her on social media. Her work is excellent. Um, the third group, which I really love, is Anglican Unscripted, which my friends George Conger and Kevin Carlson uh, uh, host each week. It's a podcast that I think does a lot of good things. Occasionally gets some things wrong, as do I. But I have found that the important thing to know is that they are quick to correct when they get things wrong or there's important things that are missing that need to be added into the record. And I would say that I am someone who is seeking to follow what they have modeled in seeking to make quick correction when I am in error, and also to provide good resources so that readers and listeners can go to primary sources rather than be uh, just left with what people are talking about, but not being able to cite that information. So I'm seeking to do that as well, and I hope those three resources are really good. Juicy Ecumenism, Anglican Unscripted, and its sister site, Anglican Inc., and then Arlie Coles at The Living Church, who I think is just exceptional in her work.
I'll have links to those resources in the show notes wherever you're listening to or watching this, viewers, listeners. You should find it in print, so you can just hit the URL if you're on your phone or computer. We've covered a lot of material in dealing with the polity of the Anglican communions, and as well as some of the different things involved in the American milieu of Anglicanism, but that broadly translates to Methodism and other traditions as well. So this is not a comprehensive thing that Mr. Walton and I have done together. It's rather something that I hope is good for your meditation and prayer life. How is it that we're going to continue to walk with the scriptures, uh, live out the history and tradition of the church, navigate challenges uh, by progressivism that do not go away whenever you leave progressivism behind? It follows. How is it that we reckon with church authority, have accountability and transparency, even as we want to honor episcopal oversight? These things are not anything that you've come to an answer on, but this is something where you can see where the rubber's hitting the road and pray over your own covenant body. I don't know how many people watch this that aren't Methodist or Anglican, but they're just looking at, hey, I want my church to thrive in the current environment, and we can learn things from these tribes. So I think you've been immensely helpful. I reached out to you initially because I knew you would be, because I've read your work for years now, actually, and have very much appreciated you condescending to a less liturgical, less organized, less porous body to kind of articulate who y'all are. And I don't know. I don't know how it is that we come together, but I still want it. And I appreciate you being a thoughtful and responsible church leader who isn't who knows that you're not perfect. You were saying this just a second ago, but anytime you say or do something wrong, you're going to circle back around, and I think that's the highest standard that we can meet. So thank you for doing that. Would you be willing to conclude our time together with a prayer for those who spent time with us?
Sure thing. Thanks so much for having me. I'd love to pray together with all of you. Please join me. Holy Father, You're a great Lord whose property is always to have mercy.
Mm.
And you know that we're in need of your mercy. Idols can't deliver. You are the only one who can save. We ask that you would save us and save your church. Lord, you set the solitary in families, and the church is a family. We ask that you would help us to be faithful as a family to you.
Yes.
Change our hearts and minds. Order our thoughts towards you. Lord, help us to be carried along this communion of saints so that we can be inspired by, loved by, and learn from the many Christians who are part of your church universal. Help us to love you with gladness and singleness of heart. We place all these things that we've talked about into your care, knowing that your words are trustworthy and true. You're where we anchor our hope. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Friends, this has been Jeff Walton, and I do hope you go over to Juicy Ecumenism, follow his work, learn from him, and I hope you take seriously the meditation today that church really only works if we're gracious. We need to hold one another to the same standard that we hope they will hold us to, and we need our churches to be heavenly places. And we're not going to see perfection this side of heaven, but we can have a culture aiming in that direction. And so may God bless you as you dive back into your local church from here. Feel free to pray for me and Mr. Walton as we continue to try and serve you and the broader church. God bless you for spending your time this way. I'll see you next time.